Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. I've recently been on a trip to London for working in social engagements, and whenever I visit London, it always stirs up some old feelings inside of me. A lot of my behaviours as a younger man were exhibited there, especially chasing women, hookup culture, these sorts of things. I always message a good friend of mine who engaged in that too in his 20s to say, I can feel the pull of the world calling me back in. It's hot weather, the women are very often scantily clad. And yeah, I'm a man. There's that pull inside of you that wants to go and engage in that carefree life. But I've learned over the years that this is a path of corrosion, which doesn't just harm me, but society too. Now, this leads me to the problem with female beauty. And I know that's a bit of an absurd title. I'm not trying to say that female beauty in and of itself is bad. Of course, it's the opposite. It's not bad at all. Female beauty is a wonderful thing. A natural wonder of the world, perhaps we could say. And I think if any man is honest, we would know that female beauty can be deeply intoxicating. Now, even at the heart of Western culture, there is this dimension of female beauty and what it means and represents. Perhaps the West has expressed that better than any other culture. But what I want to say here isn't that female beauty in and of itself is a problem. Again, it's a beautiful thing in and of itself. The problem occurs with our interaction as men with female beauty, especially in modernity, which I believe is deeply damaging men and women, and with that our culture and our civilization. So it helps to start from the very top. What is beauty in a woman? Well, by its nature, it's a force which is designed to magnetically attract men. Again, if we're all honest as men, if a beautiful woman walks by you, you naturally look at that woman. I've often said when I'm walking down the road with my wife, she's an attractive girl. If a man looks at her, I'm not going to, get upset about that. He's a man, he can't help it. If he ogles, he can help that, and I might step in at that point. However, if it's just a man whose head's being turned by a pretty girl, you're going to make yourself pretty mad and pretty ill if that's going to bother you, because that's part of life. Again, we should have a mutual respect for women, and especially other people's women. But at the same time, I don't think you can blame a man for being attracted by a pretty face. The other thing that we have to recognise with this beauty of women is, by its nature, it's going to attract men and make men want to talk to such women. They're going to want to ideally have a connection with them. And of course, in their minds, very often they might want that to lead to sex. But the problem is, if all that the world was about was just men seeing attractive women and that woman just sleeps with him, we wouldn't advance as a species and a culture and a civilization. And that's because nature's worked this wonderfully, as moderated by our tradition, in that the woman will try and pursue a high-level man if she can. Now, this is Red Pill 101 stuff. I won't get too deep into this, but a woman is ideally going to seek a man who's got good resources, good looking is a bonus, can handle himself, is intelligent, is funny. If she's very good looking, she's going to want, a really high quality man across the board. But of course, those men are going to seek the top level women as well. But why this is important is essentially it's the female block on easy sex which civilizes the man. So I'm sure we all remember what it's like to be 16, 17 and let's just say you're full of beans, put it that way. But you have to learn. You have to learn by interacting with women. I'm going to have to get in better shape. I'm going to have to try and build a career here. I'm going to have to try and become confident and not shy or nervous in front of women. And as you do all of that, you grow as a person. You become better. You become more viable. You become more capable of dealing with the world. And of course, in time, that means you're going to have access to women. Now, it's a real problem when we take that dynamic away, as the modern world has done. That really ruins men, but also women too. But we'll focus on that in a moment. What I want to explore a bit more is what happens when we just chase beauty alone as men. If we deny that path of growth. What happens in that instance is men get lost. And you'll find this throughout the Bible, throughout all the great traditional texts. They always warn about men getting overly lost in female beauty. It's not that female beauty is wrong by its nature. It's if we get lost in the lust that can stem from our own hearts, and then we can't say no to the woman, or whatever the temptation may well be. It could just be a neediness towards a woman. It might be some acting out behavior, like, pornography or masturbation or whatever. But the point is, if we can't say no, we're losing our soul. And the reason for that is we're losing our spiritual nature to a worldly force. That's demoting us from our true nature. It's a fall away from the spiritual to the worldly. Now, when we understand that through a spiritual lens, we can see why the Muslims, for instance, have got the burqa or the niqab. I always get mixed up which one's which. Now, obviously, as a Westerner, that's a bit strong for me. But I get what they're trying to do. They're trying to remove the sexual dimension from life so you can maintain the spiritual approach towards life. So men aren't falling into a lower sense of self. However, I think it would be a fair criticism that that's playing to the male ego a bit too much. Because as Christ's wonderful teaching shows, we have to be aware that the real adultery begins in our own heart. Now, that's a hard line that Christ sets up there. That is not hippy-dippy Christ, let's all go to pride marches and hold hands. That's Christ really challenging us there. Saying, look, it's not just about sleeping with another woman that you shouldn't. It's not about just giving in to the woman. It's about it happening in your heart. And why does he say that? Because he knows that if we start lusting after a woman in our heart, again, we're falling into that worldly self. We're being pulled by the world. He's not saying it's wrong to be attracted to a woman and have a healthy relationship. He's saying when we start lusting, we're already lost. It's the precursor to acting out. And of course, that's a wonderful teaching at the core of Western culture between legalism and the true spiritual life. And legalism would say, no cheating, and if you do, we'll chop your head off. But Christ is saying, well, they're just laws of the world. You need to moderate your own life, and beware of hell. And again, you can believe hell is something at the end of this world if you want. But the way I see it is you'll be dragged into hell now by that. It will seem like heaven at first, but it will take you down into hell. Now, that traditional teaching is at the very center of our civilization, or at least was, and it's the core idea behind marriage. The idea that sexual dimension of ours, it shouldn't be spread throughout the world. Because if we're trying to put on every woman, we're going to fall into the world. It should be contained within the sacred bond of marriage, which is a spiritual vow. I think I've explored that in other videos. You're going to struggle in a marriage unless you realize it's a spiritual vow of turning away from the world. Of course, sex can still be beautifully expressed in that marriage, but we have to use that energy in a healthy manner towards our partner to tighten the bond. And of course, that bond down the line becomes a safe sanctuary for the family and for children to be raised in. This is why, I'm very wary of the message of the Tates. I think one of them calls himself a Christian, but he doesn't act like it. It's not about banging all the women. That's not a Christian teaching. That's not a traditional teaching. That will lead you in to hell down the line. But of course, it will seem like heaven at first. Our tradition, historically, how we've dealt with the extreme power of female beauty and the male response to it, was by the patriarchal system. Because what that would do is actually protect the female virtue. So men would immediately see an attractive woman, but they would know with immediate effect that that woman comes with the respect of her father, her brothers, her male family. You see this beautifully expressed in the Godfather movies, if any of you are fans of those. I'm a big fan of them. And we see Michael in Sicily going back to a very traditional world. And he sees a very beautiful woman. He's like thunderstruck by her beauty. But immediately he has to speak to her father, And again, that's to put respect by her name. Women alone, unfortunately, will be abused by the unhealthy men of this world. And very often they'll think it's freedom and liberation. That's a tragedy of our age. Then, of course, they'll blame men as well. But in reality, they've destroyed the noble, loving father that would protect them from those dark men. But anyway, back to the core point. When we have patriarchy, it feeds into the idea that you speak to the father for the woman's hand in marriage. So it's almost like her protection is going on to you. Now, again, I can understand how that can be abused. That can turn to tyranny if a man is cruel and abusive, or even if a society is cruel and abusive towards women. And that's the claim, really, of liberalism and feminism. Men control the women. If they hadn't created this system, women would be free and everything would be wonderful. The universal ideas of masculinity and femininity, despite them being as old as time in every single tradition, cross-culturally, yin and yang, Rama, Sita, Adam and Eve, that's all wrong, It's all just created. And this is why people sometimes call it cultural Marxism. I know that's an unpopular phrase, but to me it's accurate, They're essentially trying to claim that if they can eradicate this traditional order, what they'll create is this land of equality between men and women where people are free. That's not going to work. That's going to create hell, because what you're doing again is destroying the male responsibility and the female integrity, and you're getting what we have today. People get used, it's getting wackier and wackier. We're not having kids, the culture falls apart, the tradition falls apart, and that damages people, to a huge extent. However, I think when we properly understand, at least in my view, the impulse for feminism, yes, there was a lot of corruptors in there. Yes, there was a lot of the Marxist messaging. But if we're really honest, there was also men. That Victorian era that preceded the rise of feminism, in many ways was too buttoned up. We could say it was maybe a bit too stringent, a bit too draconian, a bit too far into the masculine order. Maybe there was a lack of openness and love on the male side. And you could argue, emotionally speaking, that created a rebellion for the women to go into it. And that's why they were bought into what I would see as the brainwashing of the neo-Marxist feminism. When we understand that, we can understand what's happened on an energetic level between men and women. And that leads us into modernity, where we are now, with sort of the 2-3 generations after the feminist revolution, where, feminism is about, quote, freedom for women. Be the girl boss. Have multiple sexual partners if you want. Don't let those toxic males put you down, even though it's damaging them, even though it's stopping them actually building families. That's all toxic anyway. You go, girl. If we're losing out on, birth rates, we'll just import them from the third world. And you're a racist if you oppose that. So we all know the modern culture. A woman goes out, you see this in London, all she's wearing is hot pants and a boob tube. And if a man looks at her, he's a disgusting pervert and oppressor. Unless she fancies him, of course, then it's all right. And this is the mess of the modern day. This was always going to happen. The other thing about feminism, despite the irony of it really having its roots in Marxism, it's coalesced with the market forces of the age. And we all know this. Every corporation on earth at one point has used women to sell things. In fact, when I used to work in media, it was only a small operation, but we had a tester video one day where I presented something. And then we tested it with one of the blonde girls in the office. She was, pretty blonde thing, not mega pretty, but okay. And she just said what I said without really knowing what she was saying, and it got 3 times the views. That's just life. Men are visual creatures, and they will click on things that feature women. Not all men, but most men will. And you can see how this leads all the way down to things like OnlyFans eventually, where, sexual liberation means a woman can use her sexuality to earn lots of money, and men have that lust, that neediness, especially if it's unrestrained by civilization and tradition, and they will just give away their money to try and have, access to female sexuality. Now, of course, women are getting burnt by this and hurt by this, as they are in the modern hookup culture. We're not made to have multiple different partners every year. And most men get burnt as well. Because again, who's really winning from this hookup culture thing? It's a small minority of men, really. When they get to 35, these men have had 200 beautiful women. But the majority of men have had, maybe 1, maybe 2 average women. And they really are just getting left behind in the dating market. Whereas the women, again, they're all searching for that good-looking guy, but he'll pump and dump them while he searches that perfect woman, if he can still emotionally bond after sleeping with so many women. Whereas the girl bosses, it's all great in their 20s and early 30s, but suddenly they're getting old. They're not the number 1 pick anymore. Their life is devoted to a soulless corporation. They're running out of time to have children. And it's very, very difficult to meet a high-quality man. And this, of course, has happened across the West. What does that mean? No one's having healthy relationships. No one's getting married. We're not starting families. Our birth rates are plummeting. And perhaps most importantly, there's no trust in society. I've been involved in men's work and men's groups a lot in my life, and one of the complaints you hear from men, when they're really honest, is they don't trust modern women. And a lot of modern women don't trust men either. The men will sleep around, and the women will sleep around too. And I've worked in offices in London. You see what happens on a Friday night at the Christmas party when too many drinks have been had. People are in relationships, and they're doing things they shouldn't. These are the open secrets of our society. That's why marriages don't last. So what do we do with all of this? We have a disordered relationship with female beauty. Women don't understand its power, and they seem to hate men now because of feminism for noticing their beauty. And on the flip side, men are awash in a world of female beauty but can't respect it. They by all means will appreciate beauty for its wonderful aspects. And sometimes we could say that wonderful aspects are reduced to just lustful aspects, but they don't know its dark side. They don't know that it's a double-edged sword, a poison chalice, if you will. And that's why female beauty and a man's response to it is ideally met in marriage. That orders the society and orders our relationships. It enforces men into the spiritual life and the vow that takes, which will enrich your life down the line. But look, no one really cares what I'm saying here on a mass level. People want to screw each other. How on earth are you going to bring people back to tradition when there's massive opportunities for sex, or at least the promise of it, with the modern adverts and pornography and everything else that's out there? And on the flip side, the women, they want to be the girl bosses. They're being told again and again, be the girl boss. The traditional people who want to put you in chains and ruin your life. Of course, it's the opposite of what you really want if you feel the love of God. What you want is health and love for all people, especially the children that they will bring forth. But again, you're not going to get much airtime for those views. So the harsh truth is you can't change the world. And I believe that you can't change the Western world. It is in a massive state of decline, and it is going to have to learn the lessons the hard way now. There is no coming back from the brink at this point. We've gone too far. So what we can do is work on ourselves and understand that with all of these challenges comes great spiritual opportunity to learn the great wisdom of our tradition. And sometimes, the traditional teachers have been wrong too. Maybe they have been too hardline, and they've taken the love out of the spiritual understanding between men and women. But it's up to us as a new generation to reawaken the spark within these and understand what they were really all about how it's supposed to harmonize the masculine and feminine, both to create health for them in their own lives, bring them out of sin and close to God. Remember, sin is just being away from truth and peace. Think about it that way. And to create a healthy civilization and society. Now, again, we're not going to convince the whole of the West that that's the way. They're going to have to learn the hard way. But more and more people are thinking, we're off track here, men and women. And we can't have a space where you think, you got it wrong, or look at these women coming back after acting out and sleeping with hundreds of men. It does need to be a path of returning to love and returning to the true way. And it's only that that's going to give us long-term hope in the future. And that's a journey of healing for all involved. And I think there are many men out there who are wounded by what's gone on. They fall into the red pill, and there are many truths in the red pill, but it makes them angry. They've got no spiritual dimension. There's no teaching with which they can sink into to deal with this pain, to deal with being left out, to deal with the hypergamy of some modern women. So again, we have to reawaken that incredible path of overcoming the world via female beauty. That's probably the most common path for men. There are other paths. Some of us may have, be addicted to pride or power or ego or gambling or whatever it may well be. But most men, it will be by overcoming women. And that's not about being this tough guy who says, I don't want to speak to women, I hate you all. It's about being of love. It's about being able to leave it, to just walk away from the temptation of the world. And ideally, allow your sexual energy to flow fully into a committed marriage, that leads to children. Now, I know this stuff can be hard, and you're not supposed to be perfect, It's about opening up and learning over time and healing on that path of growth. And that it can be something that you achieve, and it might take time. Guys do reach out to me and say, what do I do about modern women? It's very unlikely you're going to find that perfect woman, that perfect trad girl. If you do, great, good for you. But many of us are going to have to work with what's there and go at it with a path of love rather than a path of aggression. And I told you so, and aren't modern women toxic? Some modern women are toxic, yes, but they're toxic because our civilization is toxic. They're toxic because we've moved away from the truth of the spirit, which is peace and love and order and balance. And the only way we're going to get back there is by men reopening to that path. And that begins that journey of true healing, true growth, true spiritual revolution. Of course, that's very much my aim on these channels. I will look to do more videos on the practicalities of this down the line. And I really do want to start doing the group work with guys, because look, we can all talk about this. We can read scripture, we can pray, we can contemplate. But until we start doing the work of cleaning out our inner world, we're not going to be the sort of men that can truly let the light in. So that's my real aim down the line, is to do that. And my real aim beyond that is retreats and all sorts of things that can ideally help men on this path. Anyway, I hope this video was of some use to some people out there. I do pray that you do find this true path, because believe me, it is far better than anything the world can offer. And it's far bigger than anything this world can offer as well. It will give you hope beyond this life, beyond your individual self. God bless, friends. I look forward to catching up again soon. You can join the Substack down below if you wish.